Good day and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the easiest, quickest, and my suggestion for the best delves to use not only to get your tier up to 8, but also to farm bountiful rewards for tier 8, 9, 10, and 11. Now before we go into this video, I want to let you all know a little bit about the understanding of delves this season. All delves have a new objective and story that is goblin related. The goblin related stories and objectives feel honestly quite easier than the previous season stories, and the goblin mobs feel very manageable outside of the ogre packs, which you may want to CC and have a bit of resistance and damage control for. I did most of these runs at tier 8 and 9 with around 621 gear. I then did a couple bountifuls and upgrades to push myself to 634 so that I could take on 10 and 11. And I did all of these delves at tier 11 with a little bit of difficulty on some, but I find that these are definitely the best ones based on me having done all the delves at 8, 9, 10 and most of them at 11. So we'll start with Tak-Rethan Abyss, which is an Tak-Rethan. This one, honestly, most players should expect this one by now. There's a couple of reasons why. The main one being is that it is very quick. It's a super linear map, it's a very small map. The objectives are always super simple, whether it's the pheromone objective or the repair objective. The final boss never feels difficult. There are Cobus tricksters, and I mentioned them and some of the packs players may struggle with. The big thing is with Season 2, there is a merchant or a scuba diving set or some kind of air mitigation that you get at the beginning of every water delve. So a lot of water delves have become vastly easier due to the fact that air feels like it's not really a issue. It wasn't before because of water breathing potions, but now it definitely doesn't feel like a major concern for players. So this one feels pretty good. Outside the Cobus trickster packs, I felt like this one's always a reliable. You do have to be a little bit careful of mob density, but honestly this is just one of the quickest, easiest ones, especially if you are a tank. I feel like the mobs really lean themselves to being pulled in. Please remember, Bran also has a tanking spec now, so for those of you who may have struggled with kind of big, wide mob density pack delves before, you might find now that you find them a lot easier. Spiral Weave, also an Tak-Rethan, is another favorite of mine. This one will be difficult for characters or classes that do not have a lot of CC or have not spec'd Bran into tanking spec or provided him with CC-centric curios. The nice thing about this is that the layout is incredibly quick. It's very simple, a super straightforward delve. The final boss is always incredibly easy, and you can even have runs where you just don't deal with the final boss, which I find to be pretty good. One of the big things here is that you take on a lot of Nerubians, which are generally spellcasters. Although this is usually an issue, I do find that in Spiral Weave there's enough kind of corners and rooms and things to kind of remove that threat from them by just pre-locating yourself to obviously break their line of sight. It's a short map and the packs are not too far spread out and also aren't too close together. There's one or two tricky sections, but generally speaking I find this one is very simple. The next one is Nightfall Sanctum and Hollowfall. This one also just another one that really thrives on its linear kind of style. You either start at the back and move to the front, or you start at the front and move to the back depending on the storyline. The more difficult version of this is honestly the original version. The shades and casters are generally the harder ones to deal with, but because the other mobs are so like non-factor, you can generally deal with them quite well. Just don't focus on the various little kind of soldiers you pick up, and just focus on the heavy spellcasters and you'll be fine. There is one boss that can cause players problems, and that is the triple spellcaster boss, where basically you fight 3 beefed up versions of the one ad that will give you troubles throughout the delve. So I would be very careful on taking this on. should you be taking on them as a boss. And that will occur if you start from the back. So if you're starting from the back, from the ship side, maybe refrain from doing this one and rather do this one when it's bountiful and you're starting from the front. It's just a lot easier to take on the 1 spellcaster boss than it is to take on the 3, because for those classes that don't have a lot of CC interrupts or silences, you can struggle. But the mob layout here is excellent. You very rarely will pull 2 packs together, so it's honestly a really simple one. The next one is the Sinkhole in Hollowfall. This one I find to be one that grows on me every single delve season. One thing I'll say here is that it's super linear, and also again the fact that you don't have to struggle for air anymore is something that is incredibly good. So the fact that you don't have to struggle for air is massive. Like I said, in all these water ones, it is a Cobus one, but it's more the Cobus spellcasters that you have to deal with here. Although as annoying as the tricksters, generally it's a bit easier because they don't have that weird spike damage move that will give you a big old chunk of health loss. The mobs can be slightly cramped, especially around the corners, so you do have to be a little bit mindful of what you're pulling and where you're firing your AoE, especially as you go around the first kind of weaving section. You can very easily accidentally pick up a traveling pack or anything. However, I do find this is a less CC intensive dungeon that generally speaking favors your single target damage dealers and your damage dealers in general. If you're a DPS that's struggling with a lot of the other delves on this list, then this is definitely going to be the delve for you, because it has quite a high focus on single target priority units, and then a couple of adds that you don't really need to focus on. The final boss fight as well, although spawning adds only really spawns 1 or 2 at a time, that generally are quite easy to focus down as a single target, and then you obviously want to take on the boss. For me, this one was pretty straightforward, as most of them were, but I found like when I was going through this that it definitely feels one I'd probably come back to on my mage or my hunter or any of my single target kind of range classes. Then the final one, which I actually think is a lot of fun depending on your class, is Sidestreet Sluice. Now, I will say the first couple runs I did of this on tier 8, 9, 10 were quite confusing, especially the 2 runs I believe I did on tier 8. Honestly, the map layout was a bit difficult to get the hang of, just because I think it's new. But once I got familiar with it, especially on my Demon Hunter, I had a great time. I think any class that's mobile, has a double jump, has speed boosting, anything like that, is going to enjoy this a ton, because there's a lot of verticality to it, and you can really find a lot of cool little shortcuts to take advantage of. It's also a goblin-centric delve, and as I mentioned before in the beginning, I find the goblin packs this season are far easier to handle than the non-goblin ones that we had last season. Outside of the ogre pack that can spawn and give you a lot of issues, which generally speaking you can just use cooldowns to kind of deal with, I found that, basically, to be honest with you, it just wasn't really that big an issue dealing with the goblins. Of course, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who played all of this as a tank, so as a DPS I can't really vouch. But I think for me personally, I did find that the goblin packs were functionally a bit easier to handle. And the Sidestreet Sluice, once you get used to that verticality and map layout, has some clear objectives. It's got good mob spread out, and I think it's actually very quick to go because there's a lot of shortcuts you can take advantage of once you really get used to the positioning of the objectives. But yeah, that's it for me. Those are my best choices to clear for tier 8, 9, 10, and 11. And basically, for season 2, that's what I'll be using when available. Bye.